Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today I have a confession to make. But first, as always, I'm joined by my co-host and the leader of the new Bald Supremacist Party, Martin McMahon.
How you doing, Tony?
More importantly, we're delighted to be joined in the Tortoise Shack by MEP for Dublin, member of the European People's Party and member of the Committee on Economics and Monetary Affairs, the omnipotent is the right word, I think, Brian Hayes. Now, first for the confession. Brian and I are BFFs, okay?
The best.
And under this rugged socialist demeanour, beats the heart.
Oh, for neoliberal. I know. I feel so hungry.
The application form's in the post, by the way.
Yeah. No, this is, Brian's godfather to both my children, lads, so I don't want to take any of this nonsense. And to his credit, he's never outed me to my lefty friends, so,
Not yet.
No, but Brian, thanks so much for coming on.
Good to be here, Tony. Good to be here. Thank you.
No, listen, joking aside, honestly, because we're in correspondence for a while now. We've got along quite well, and it's always nice to be able to talk to people and have the other side, and even if and quite often we don't disagree, that's the scary part. And what people don't understand on the wider body politic is there's not a huge difference between much of what people would believe out there in the world, as opposed to just we're in this camp and you're in that camp, and never the twain shall meet.
That's the lesson of politics, isn't it? Really, I mean, that's how you actually go from A to B and bring people with you. That's the big challenge. I'm not very ideological, although I'm an absolute ardent capitalist. No, I don't. But I believe in believe in certain things. But I think the level of difference between political parties and the mainstream parties is very, very small. And that's actually, I've always regarded that as a strength. I don't regard it as a weakness. But I think it's very important that people have converse. Yeah. Because I actually, one of the outworkings of the crisis is the fact that people are really interested in politics. And it's only when we tease things out and have genuine debate rather than shouting around and screaming at people that you can make progress,
Well, now, Brian, that being said, you're out in Brussels. That's got to be different now. When you're looking in, and you're in this week is a great eye opener when we want to talk about Brussels, because the simple fact is, much of what's happening in Irish banks this week is really because of the EBA. It's the European Banking Authority. It's not so much.
No, and I keep making one of the reasons I stood for the European Parliament. First and foremost, I was there for nearly 4 years as Michael Newman's understudy, and I learned a lot from him, I can tell you, over the years. But I was at the table of the Eurogroup, at the table of ECOFIN. I saw the way in which 70% of all Irish law on financial services is now decided in the European Union in co-decision making. I saw the way the world was going. So, really, Ireland makes very few decisions now about financial institutions. As you rightly say, it's set by the SSM or the ECB, or in this case, the EBA. So the reason why the banks have to get the NPLs down, the non-performing loans down, is because they have to oblige to follow the rules. Rightly so, in my view. But it's how you do it is the question.
Yeah.
And actually, the rules that have been set at the moment, which Permanent TSB and others are trying to follow, will be outdated in a while, because we've a whole new rule book being put in place for new loans, not historic loans, but for new loans for the future. But one of the things that you do notice about being out there in the European Union is that, when it comes to financial institutions and finance, the rules are now being decided in the European Union. And that's where we need to, we don't never talk about it in this country. No one talks about the SSM. What is the SSM? They don't talk about Danielle and Noe. They don't talk about Draghi. They don't talk about all of these players. And if they did, and if we had a proper debate, I think people would understand the net issues a bit more.
I agree with you totally, but I also think that the reason sometimes we don't have that is because our politics doesn't even paint that picture in a good way. In other countries where the EU, within the members, they've had more meetings in terms of the Future of Europe paper that came out and the scenarios. They had more meetings, they had more town halls, they had more.
I'll give you an example. I was at an in-camera meeting of the Econ Committee to look at the nominations of Luis de Gringas, who's the current finance minister of Spain, who's soon going to become the vice president of the ECB, and our own governor, Philip Lane. The two of them were at this in-camera meeting. There was 15 Spanish TV crews there, countless numbers of journalists on the way in, and not one Irish journalist was there. And the point I'm making is that, it's not just about journalism not following what's going on in Brussels. Our party doesn't follow it. I don't believe any political party really follows what's happening. There's no debate amongst the membership about the future of Europe. There's no debate about financial law. And as a consequence of that, the whole debate's diminished. So if we're going to be in this thing into the future, which I passionately believe we should be, it requires us all to move up the food chain a bit in terms of the knowledge we all have and the debate. Because I hate the way in which some elements of disruptive political elements in this country regard the EU Commission, the ECB and everyone that works for them as some kind of gang out there to do Ireland down again. And this awful kind of thing you listen to people, that they're all out to get us. That's just bull.
Well, I know, okay, there are those that exist way out there on the fringes who talk about a nationalist Ireland and not those, but there are people who have genuine concerns about the direction of the EU, who still want to be in the EU, but have really, and the genuine concerns, we come back to what we debate, what we don't debate. PESCO, we are tumbling away from neutrality. We've never had the discussion. Leo has redefined neutrality, or says that neutrality is redefined in a modern age. The white paper Tony referred to, every single part of that paper had something to do with PESCO on it, and yet we haven't had this conversation.
Yeah, well, one thing I would agree with you on the PESCO thing, the disgrace for me was the fact that the Dáil had a few days to debate the thing. Because I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with PESCO. If it left to me, I'd go further. I'd go further than PESCO. I believe in the defence union, but I believe we can shape that defence union by sitting around the table and trying to reflect Irish traditions and values in that defence union by pretending that this has nothing to do with us. So I actually think we've never had a debate on defence and security in Ireland, because once you say that, immediately people take up hostile positions and don't really want to debate the issue, but just want to go back on a default position of some historic neutrality, which I think the world has changed. I mean, this idea of neutrality in the current circumstances, and I'm not neutral on standing up for things like freedom, standing up for things like democracy, believing that
But that's not what neutrality means. Now,
I wonder.
No.
I think we've never debated it. I think we're non-aligned. I actually think the better description of Ireland's policy in this area is not neutrality. It is that we are a non-nuclear, non-aligned country. That is fundamentally different from saying that one is neutral. How can you be neutral in what you see in Syria?
Now, well, we just did a Syria podcast this week with Ronan, and there are very differing views within Ireland about Syria. Now, Tony and I have our views, but there are other people quite vociferously have views that what we're seeing is not what's going on. With neutrality, I understand what you're saying, but from my position, neutrality means more than that. Neutrality is all of those things that you say, and it is more. It is more. You can be on the side of right, you can be on the side of justice, and still be neutral. We don't have to be part of a military union. When they talk about it, they talk about Russia in terms of building its defences on the front lines of Europe. And already the language is set out.
It's the language, I think, being the problem. I accept that. But when you drill through what's going to, there's not going to be a European army, despite what some people say, in my view. I'm not in favour of massive militarisation across Europe. I'm not in favour, fundamentally, of moving away from our mutual defence pact, because I think the existing structures in Ireland require the Dáil, the government, the triple lock. I am in favour of looking again at the triple lock, because there are reasons why, if you rely fundamentally on a UN position, even though that UN position can't be put in place because of politicking, as we saw in the Macedonian case some years ago, there are issues with that. So I think all these things are happening, but other questions have to be asked. I mean, why is it a country like Sweden, a traditional neutral country like our own, it's having a much more honest, upfront, mature debate about what they need into the future and how possibly Europe can help in that regard. I think what we're spending on security and defence in Ireland is a joke. I think if you have an army, they have to be properly equipped, properly supported in terms of the capital investment, properly paid to make sure that they're doing the job that they want. But also, we've got to realise that the threats we face today are fundamentally different to the threats that were there in the 60s and 70s. They're around cybersecurity, data questions, counter-terrorism measures. These are the issue is not so much defence, it's security. How we can secure against the things which are obvious.
I agree with a large part of what you're saying, but I disagree with the remedy. I think that if you're going to actually tackle a lot of these threats, you go after them at source. You change the hearts and minds of some of these people that are attacking them, instead of actually saying, peace. People say peace must be fought for. What an idiot expression.
But nowadays, it's not like one army against the next.
No.
There are new threats, as we know. Like, I mean, we are exposed in many respects. We have very significant multinationals in this country. We have big data storage centres in this country.
We're the global server for many of the biggest multi corporates in the world.
So I would argue that Ireland is potentially a target in the whole question of security. And yet we don't have any interoperability between our intelligence. We have the Gardaí doing domestic intelligence, at the Defence Forces doing intelligence from abroad. There are things we can do to improve our own security, but there are equally things that we need Europe to help us with, because it's not nation state against nation state anymore.
Well, and you bring up data, and we all know where our data protection head office is situated. I mean, you could drive a truck into it if you so felt like it. Data has also come up now with the new regulations coming out of Europe and the Public Services Card.
The GDPR.
And the Public Services Card, and I straight up from my point of view, is an extreme threat. You've got to take it from the villain's point of view. You've put all your jewels in one basket. It's one target, and all data leaks eventually. It's on an infinite timeline, all data leaks eventually. So we are not doing best practice according to what Europe is telling us we need to do already, and Ireland is looking to opt out of most of the provisions that are coming down the track. So it's okay to say, yes, we want to increase spending for cooperation, and that it's not going to be on a military side. But we're not cooperating already, and once you let the military genie out of the box, it only ever grows.
But the military genie, as you describe it, I mean, one of the things that we do have is this triple lock. And I'm looking at, can we improve it? Because the public have to be assured that any time we commit troops for some kind of action, be it Operation Sophia in the Mediterranean at the moment, which is about trying to save lives and make sure that people smugglers and their crafts are put to one side, I think Irish people want to help in that regard.
Yes.
I think Irish people want to help in Mali, for instance, in the work that's going on there. The point I'm making is that too often we see, in a kind of a simplistic way, where we're doing UN work, that's great. Where we're doing EU work, that's bad. Yet in recent years, the work that the EU has been asked to do by the UN in our neighbourhood in Africa, in the Middle East and elsewhere, is actually very important for what Ireland can do, because we have the expertise on humanitarian relief. We have the expertise, especially when it comes to peacekeeping. I think we are really renowned as peacekeepers.
Yes.
And I think we have an awful lot to bring to the table. And what I'm sort of saying is that we need to have this debate without the name calling, which we're not having. We're having an honest debate about different perspectives on this.
Yeah.
But I sometimes feel in the political debate that once you start raising these questions about amending the triple lock, or looking at our neutrality, or seeing how our traditions could fit into European defence system, or doing more, for instance, on looking at how our weapons, the capital investment could be helped by better procurement, or using some EU partners' capital investment for our funds, all of that kind of stuff. The moment you raise that, all the name calling starts. I'll give you an example. In our group, the European People's Party, we have very significant parties in Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. When I'm at a group meeting, they constantly talk to me about Putin, about the threat from Putin. We know the threat of Russia. We know the threat from cybersecurity. twice in the last 8 months, the HSE was knocked out for a whole weekend because of cybersecurity. That's going to become more and more common.
Mm-hmm.
And the point I'm making is these new threats, not only will it help us to create solidarity with other member states by understanding where they're coming from, but equally we can get the expertise of other member states in trying to counter the security risks that we face. And I don't see anything bad in that.
Well, I again, there's nothing wrong with preparing for, like, Russia is trebling its military spending. That's what it's doing.
I'm not suggesting that, by the way.
No, but they are doing that, and so if you were in Lithuania, Latvia, and you were an ex-Soviet state in effect, you're obviously looking there.
They feel under the cosh.
Yes, absolutely. But there's no harm in solidarity and standing with our people and standing with people within the wider. Well, it doesn't have to be EU members. You can stand with people all around the world. I'm quite. I don't really believe in borders too much. That's my problem. I'd be a loon when it comes to that side of things. But on the flip side, Brian, if you're going to continue to live on this premise where the EU pats itself on the back for 80 years of stability and doesn't own up to the fact that a lot of that is born out of we live in a Western culture where we have certain standards of living that a lot of it is maintained on the backs of parts of the other parts of the world where we can take resources from. If we're going to go that way, well, then you're creating animosity. You're actually leading yourself to those people who.
Yeah, but I think one of the positive things I speak to people the whole time about the European Union, one of the things we should be proudest about as Europeans, like, we commit more in development aid than any other part of the world, not just bilaterally member state to member state, but also the EU budget in terms of the 7-year program. It commits more than any other part of the world, and as we should. We have a responsibility as one of the richest blocs in the world to try to help where we see it, particularly in our neighbourhood area of Africa, a proper economic investment there. So, Europe used to be much more powerful. It used to be much wealthier. We're now 7% of the world's population. We were 10% some years ago. We have 20% of the world's GDP. And we have 50%, socialists hate to say this, 50% of all social spending in the world is within the 28 member states of the European Union. So we have a responsibility to reach out, also change our own system to become more competitive long term, so that we can ensure that we deliver for people here in the European Union. But I'm very much in favour of the European Union giving more, standing up for the values that we regard as normal values.
It could be an easy way for the European Union to actually make a difference in the morning to countries in Africa and things. They could stand up to the World Bank and say to them for the way we're actually delivering aid into these countries with tide aid and the way we're doing these things, we need to stop that on the basis, and we need to stop.
We're doing more than just standing up to anyone. We're actually delivering. The mandate of the European Investment Bank, the EIB, has been radically altered the last 5 years to actually help what we describe as neighbourhood third countries, where we have, you look at the migration patterns, you look at the emerging, like some of the African countries that are going really well right now, very substantial GDP growth. But the dilemma is that the level of political maturity and, as one would expect, a movement towards a democratic society has not happened yet, and you still see terrible corruption. But the European Investment Bank is now delivering in those parts of our neighbourhood in European taxpayers' money and EU backed funded money into those communities. Now, that has to be in our long-term interest as a bloc to make sure that Africa is a success.
Well, for me, and I'm going to wrap these issues together, the PSC, neutrality, European spending, and bring it back to what you said, in that the parties of government, parties that are the major parties here, are centre. And they're all occupying...
Tell me about it.
all occupying the same space. Well, yeah, we'll argue about centre another day.
Kind of.
Okay,
yeah.
But
I don't disagree with that.
Because they are that way,
yeah,
we're not having the conversation.
No.
So you and I have had more of a conversation about neutrality than anybody has, and we have differing views. But what's happening, and it's what's happening with everything, with the PSC, because the conversation is going to be difficult, the parties of government are avoiding the conversation, and these things are creeping in regardless.
I'm like, it's great to talk about neutrality. It's great to talk about the fact that we're actually having these conversations. And you've hit on something when you talk about the the centre, and God hate that phrase, the centre must hold, because I think you need any change sometimes is ugly, and it's born out of actually conflict and having the conversation. We can't hide away from the real threats that actually are in Ireland, and it's Brexit, and it's actually where we're going to be between now and post Brexit, and the common consolidated corporate tax rate. These things, Brian, I know you've written about them and I've written about them. I don't see many other people giving them too much credence in terms of the tax base. And I know, and this is a bit of a kick at you, Brian, you call it a red line issue.
Well, it is a red line issue, because I'm not a federalist. I don't believe in federated. I don't believe in the United States of Europe, which about 20% of them do.
Can I stop you for 1 second? If they wanted a United States of Europe, that's grand. We'll have X% of your gas and your oil and X% of all of that, and we can all divvy out.
Oh, well, I'd start with the military. We have X amount of your soldiers and X amount of your soldiers.
But could you imagine though, like if you turned around and said we want to go that route, and we have it's a federal state, and we're going to do it like
but
this.
It's not going to happen. No one wants it. Well, 20% of the European Parliament wants. The European Parliament you can understand that, but 20% of Europeans want full federation. I don't want that. I believe I want more integration, and I want also accountability in how we make those decisions. But that requires us having the debates. And going back to your comments about political parties not debating these things, there's very little appetite in Ireland to talk about these issues. It's an outcome of our political system, which is so localised, and people obsessed about their constituency and all the rest of it. And that's a real, it dulls the whole debate down. When you go to other member states, people know exactly, all of the terminology of the European terminology that's going on from one week to the next. But I think, because of Brexit, we're going to have to really up our game on the whole European debate so much more. Because, I was at a council meeting at the time. Frequently you hide behind the British lines constantly. They're no longer there. So we need to create new alliances. I spoke to Pascal recently, Minister for Finance. Very interesting dinner he had a few weeks ago, where he described about 9 member states from the Baltics, Scandinavian countries, and some of the low countries with Ireland coming together and trying to find a voice, because they would be similar enough in terms of the kind of big private sector economies, less regulation, kind of export-orientated countries. And I was interested, his remarks at it, that here are 9 member states, smallish countries, but all with the same view. And we often think that just because Britain are leaving, there's no one else in the European Union who thinks like Ireland. That's not the case. Germany is a very outward-looking, export-orientated country. So we've got to up our game on Europe and make sure we have this debate. We're also going to be net contributors. I think this is a fantastic achievement that we're now paying into the European Union. And you know what? In my view, we should pay more in. Leo spoke in the European Parliament as Taoiseach just a few weeks ago, and he said this thing. We had no debate on it. I would expect people to say, no, not a penny more to Europe. At least you can have a debate on it. But actually, the debates that really need to be held now on the budget, on defence and security, on future EU integration, on tax, there is no appetite for that debate.
Well, okay.
That's wrong. Us, what's appetite to us, but you weren't small enough.
I'm going to pull you back a little and about that we're now net contributors. But we are now contributing based upon a leprechaun economics GDP figure, which means whatever we are contributing is not right in the first place. No. Nobody can fix it. Nobody can tell us what our GDP is. Nobody can.
It's actually the budget is made by the GNI, not by the GDP. And there's a misnomer that in some way, because of the aberration of the figures some years ago, that was the big leap. We were already contributors at that stage. So that's
we were. But the proportion we pay.
Yeah, well, going up a little bit. But the question, our objective is, we're at this exporting business. That's what makes us a strong country. That's what's allowed, so much of the business success in recent years. It's in our interest that we pay into this budget. Why? Because poorer countries will become wealthier and they'll buy the goods and services that we provide. That's the logic of an internal market.
But the argument here is, if you want to look for poor countries, look beyond Dublin 4 in this country, and there's one right there.
Well, I have to make the point here. We are a rich country, right?
Now,
we are a rich country. How we spend our resources, how we tax, how we deal with poverty and deprivation is our responsibility. We can have a whole program about that. But as far as Europe's concerned, if you look at the figures in terms of what has happened in this country in the last 10 to 15, 20 years, even with the crash, we are a rich country.
There's no doubt we're a rich country. There's no doubt we're actually, that we have, if you take a mean average, we're a rich country by any standard, whether you want to go by the World Bank standards of poverty, you want to take any marker you want. There's no doubt about that. Where the doubt creeps in for where we're talking, where we've been talking for the last number of months, is about, are we actually making the best use of our,
That's
like if we're buying, if it's costing the state an average of 360,000 to buy a house, and we can build them, Brian, two kilometres up there for 151,000.
But that's the domestic responsibility of the government, no matter who's the government, our crowd or the other crowd, whoever, to make sure that we have an adequate supply of affordable houses. And clearly we have not succeeded in that regard. That's what we've got to make sure we can do over the coming years. We still have a very dysfunctional housing market. I know that for a fact. All you have to do is look around and see it. And some of that is an outcome of the last 10 years, no doubt. But as to where this country is, I mean, I said recently in a speech, there is no reason why in the next 10 years we can, on average, have a rate of growth of about 3 to 4%. If you got 3% for a 10-year basis, that's 30% increase in GDP. Look what you could do for the health service. Look what you could do for capital investment. Look what you could do for education. And the point is, where the key thing that those of us on the centre right argue, the key thing is to make sure the economy is strong. Without a strong economy, we have nothing.
But we've never had 30 years. And I don't
or
think,
10 years.
10 years. And I mean, it is cyclical. No matter what way you look at it, it's cyclical. You've got to plan for the good and the bad.
Yeah, and there will be bad years. There will be bad years. But in the round, I mean, we had 18 years ago, we had 1 million people working in our country. We have 2.2 million people. There is no industrialized society in Western Europe that has doubled its labour force in such a short period of time.
Okay, now I have to say, because I've written, I don't know if you've seen this, I've written about this recently, about gigification of the Irish economy, about the bogus self-employed, and about the government creating bogus self-employed workers. And I know, and Fine Gael had this lovely factoid of, we created 140,000 jobs.
They didn't create them.
It's
business people who create them. It's not a.
But I'm even being gracious and giving that. Okay, Fine Gael created.
I'd never say that.
140,000
Politicians don't know nothing about creating jobs.
Well, between 2011 and 2015. But what they're not saying is that 37.5 thousand of those jobs were self-employed. That's 4 times the rate of self-employment creation than anywhere else in the EU.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that not what's the difficulty in terms of self-employed people?
Okay, for every 19%, and this is the state's the only investigation they've ever carried out, 2 investigations. For every 19% for every 13% of the workforce classified as self-employed, 19% of those are bogus self-employed. And if you apply that right across the EU, the rates of self-employment that look like that going all the way to Greece with 3 out of 10, it equalises it.
All I know that in the last 12 months, there were 48,000 net new jobs created. And of those, 70% were, because sometimes the left produce that they're all part-time, low-wage jobs. Of the 48,000 jobs created last year in the economy, not by politicians, by real private sector people, 70% of those were full-time rather than part-time. I also know in the last 12 months that 24,000 new businesses started. Most of those were micro businesses, even less, the self-employed people you're talking about. And that's the second highest rate of self-employed employment opportunities across the European Union in the last 12 months.
Okay, but...
And I think that shows something that I think the left don't get in this country, that actually the big new drivers of jobs in this country isn't the multinational sector. It is 2 things. The domestic economy is now moving in the right direction. We also have an enterprising culture in Ireland.
No, and I wrote 12,000 12,000
Well, I'm going to read that. I'm going to read that.
It's like a novel.
I have written 12,000
well,
words.
maybe I'll read the executive summary.
That's not what's happening. That's not what's happening.
Brian, there is a problem when you see a guy on a mountain bike with a Deliveroo thing on his back, and he's the CEO of Mountain Bike Enterprises. He's not. He's simply a delivery boy for whatever company it is, but they call him self-employed.
No, but the other side of this, Tony, is this.
No, we're going to.
The other problem. I mean, I don't care what he calls himself. I care that he's earning an income and he's paying tax.
Yeah, but the state is losing.
Hang on for a moment. Now, let's be very clear about this. As I said in an article recently, at the moment, in income tax, last year we took in slightly over 21 billion.
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago, we were taking in 13.5 billion. So, of all these bogus lads are running around the place, are on their bikes, not paying any tax, CEOs, whether you're, whatever you're having yourself, the facts are that the tax in a 10-year period has increased by 13 to 20 billion.
But
on income tax, I'm talking
bogus
about.
self-employment is social welfare fraud. It's calling an employee self-employed to avoid your tax obligations, most significantly PRSI. And that's what it is defined as. That's what the minister came out last week and said that's what it is. So are we saying that bogus self-employment, which is social welfare fraud, is okay because? Or are we saying social welfare fraud, no matter where it exists, is wrong? Or are we making the distinction that some social welfare fraud is okay?
No, well, I don't know. I'm not making any distinction. All I'm saying is that we have one of the highest rates of job growth in the European Union.
There's no question.
And it's there. It's not. And one of the things that I think that we don't do enough in recognising that actually we're a much more enterprising country than people think. I also think one of the outworkings of the multinationals here has helped that kind of enterprise can-do attitude. And actually, if you look at economic cycles, in any circumstance where there's been a crash like in Ireland, the first thing that comes back is because of wage depreciation is an export-led economy. The next thing after that is where you see an improvement in the number of jobs. But the third part is the investment part. That's the piece we need to see. I've said in the past, we were relatively lucky in government actually, because not just that Fianna Fáil had made the mess and we had to clean it up, but we were lucky because at the time the euro had depreciated so radically against the dollar and sterling at the time, and it allows us to sell our goods and services at a much better rate. So the export-led economy really helped Ireland get out of the mess it was in. And we're actually, even though the euro has come back in the last number of years, and the last year or so because of Brexit, it's appreciated more against sterling and against the dollar. As a consequence of that, we can be lucky again because we're going to be selling into a eurozone that's now up on nearly 2.5% growth last year. So the point I'm making is, the Irish story is a story of full employment. The Irish story is a story of an enterprising culture. And we sometimes can't admit that. It's actually a great success of centre-left and centre-right politics in Ireland that over a 20-year period, we've got the economy into this position, notwithstanding the problems with the banks and the crash that came about us. And I think, we're in a much better position than many Mediterranean countries that don't have any positive attitude when it comes to business. The reason why we have very high rates of employment in the private sector is because of that enterprising culture.
But Brian, we had that pre-crash.
No, we didn't.
We did.
We did not.
Our hours worked pre-crash. Our hours worked pre-crash were higher than the EU average as a unit of person. A person working was doing an average of 42.5 hours a week. The European average is 37.5 hours a week.
Tony, how can you say that? When the jobs crashed, 35% of all jobs lost in the crisis were to do with the construction industry, directly and indirectly. How can you say that? We had a totally reliance on construction.
Absolutely, but our people, the lads, the guys that came off the sites, it wasn't down to their lack of get up and go. It wasn't down
No. I'm saying certainly we had a very substantial private sector economy, but it ballooned. We
were building 125,000 houses a year.
And I know it's sort of, I've jumped you a bit because you haven't read the 12 words, so I will give you the opportunity.
Give me a copy before we go.
I will definitely give you the opportunity, but I'll make a last point on construction. Yes, you're dead right. jobs dropped like a stone after 2007 in construction. But an anomaly showed up. You'd expect precarious work to drop faster than the employed work, because that's what you expect. That's why it is precarious work, the subcontracted, the self-employed. It grew. It actually grew. And that's the reverse of what you would expect. And that's exactly what happened in 1966 in England when they brought in SET, so that they could offload their employees and take them back on as self-employed. Now, that's what the figures indicate happened in Ireland. And that's from the Quarter National Household Survey. So that's what indicates Ireland's rate of self-employment is 16%. Germany's is half that. Greece is 4 times Luxembourg, twice as much as Ireland. Greece has the worst economy in the EU. Your rates of self-employment are not an indicator that something good is happening. The difference between a good economy and a bad economy is the amount of people, and it's a measure that works right across the board, in self-employment.
But I think that the real measurement of where an economy is, it's not really investment, or it's not export-led economy. It's the domestic economy. Where stands people spending? And I think I wrote an article recently about the big challenge this year, because we are going to see wage rates going up. It took hold last year. I think it's going to be more pronounced this year, because there's a labour shortage now in key sectors, and needless to say, wages will have to rise. And there's issues around that, because in any kind of Eurozone system of 19 member states, the way in which you actually become more competitive is actually to have wage rates at a sustainable level, rather than some massive increase or decrease. And I think there's a huge challenge around that. But the domestic economy is now taking hold. That's very, very, very clear. And I think the other point I would make is, and this goes back to my old friend Mr. Draghi, on his long-term plan for the Eurozone to get us up to about 2% inflation. If we get close to that 2%, and underlying inflation is improving in the Eurozone right now, which is really good, that will be the most important thing, because that means that the big economies like France and Germany will start spending more and buying the goods and services that we can offer at more competitive rates. And I think, despite the fact that everyone said the Eurozone was a basket case, would split north, south, east, west, that Greece would be chucked out and all the rest of it, all of the famous voodoo economists who promised all this nadir, none of it came to pass.
Oh, well, because they were terrified after they saw what happened to Greece. They saw Greece let out, put up against the wall, and the triggers were almost pulled on
I've remembered what they've. I have a whole catalogue of what all these guys said 10 years ago, and not one of them got it right.
Yeah, but hang on. Here's it would be remiss if we didn't if we let you out the door without saying. You must be cock-a-hoop with all the polls. All the polls. You're flying. You're 8 points up on Fianna Fáil. You're 6 points in another one. They're 17 points behind where they were.
In Bertie territory.
In Bertie territory.
Leo territory.
Yeah. This is when we look at that, and I said, I wrote a piece last week, and I said, God, it kills me to say it, but the public love him. They love him, and it's driving me insane.
I know, I can see it in your face there.
There's a plague of cognitive dissonance going on. It's just unbelievable. But
no. So, all joking aside, that's got to be, you're in general election territory. If you can get through if you can get to the next budget. The GDP rules loosen up nicely, Brian.
Oh yeah, once you hit the balanced budget rule, you can all bets are off, because the rules don't really apply. You can once you stay in balance, I have to say. But you are right. Once we're going to hit this year. Once we're at balanced budget this year, you have an awful lot more flexibility in expenditure.
Fianna Fáil ain't going to let you get there.
Well, I don't know. I think Varadkar's a very, very interesting person. And I'm not just saying this for the first time in a long time. I got a Fine Gael leadership vote right. It took me about 20 years. But,
got or made?
No, I got it right. And I made it as well. But I voted for two reasons. The first was, in a funny way, after Enda Kenny and Michael Noonan and all of those characters and what they did for the country and all the rest of it, this wasn't Fine Gael moving to the next generation. It was Fine Gael moving 2 generations. I'm 48, and I look like an old fellow by comparison to these guys at the moment in government. And I think that sense of moving to Varadkar so quickly has helped the country move on to the idea, actually, the bloody crisis is over. Get over yourself. It's time to get the country right again. And we're on the right track. And no matter who's in government, there's a great opportunity to do things for the country. And it was that, in a sense, that kind of light went on when Varadkar came in that, you know, the worst days are behind us. And that was always going to be impossible to achieve as long as Enda was there, in my view. The other thing about Varadkar that gets me is, he speaks about the meritocratic society, and I agree with him fundamentally on that. We'll
hit pause on that and go, Martin, you get his legs, I get his legs.
But the thing about Varadkar, he is an embodiment of that. What I mean to say is that, you know, if you look at Fine Gael politics,
you're absolutely right. He started out in a nice upper middle class.
No, but hear me out.
Castleknock and did quite nicely.
But no, hard work beats all. Just give me this is the point I'm making. Up to now, a leadership of Fine Gael, you know, if you're from one of the big families, the Fitzgeralds, the O'Higginses, the Mulcahys, the Colbys, whoever, you have a great chance, right? This guy was not known by anyone. He lands on the political stage. He works 24/7, totally committed to it. And he got the job because of merit. We've been very frank about it. Because he was seen to be the best.
He got the job because he was the best at planning, and he was the best at
he was more than that,
Tony.
He was best across the whole gamut of things that a politician looks at. And I think the fact that we've selected such an untraditional person to lead our party, right? The age and everything around that, I think sends a message out. I'm not to say, I actually believe this, that the kind of idea that he's trying to reflect of kind of meritocracy, that people might say, oh, just this Fine Gael crowd actually, having gone to this fellow called Varadkar, whose name we can't even pronounce, with everything around him, it says something different about Fine Gael. And I think that's what the public like, is this idea of something entirely different, not from a political family, who has just managed to walk onto the stage.
And I'll counter that with one demographic, with one real big demographic reason why you went to Leo. And it's not, and Leo had the website set up long before the gun ever went off in the campaign. He was ready. Okay.
To be a politics ready.
Yeah, but hang on, that's to his credit. I'm not knocking the guy. He was the most prepared, he had all his ducks in a row. My God, they came out in front of the microphones and the contest was over before lunchtime. Okay. Simon was still putting on his shoes and the contest was as good as over. That's to his credit, but he also falls in what Simon McGarr called the top, right there in that the 35 to 45-year-old, which is the largest voting bloc coming of age now, that own the country in the next couple of years, because the generation below us, the 25 to 35-year-olds, they're not in the same numbers and they won't have the same concerns and it's my generation. We're the ones that are going to push this on, and Leo hits that perfectly. Whether I believe in him as a person doesn't really matter. He's in that age group and he fits the character. So it was well chosen. I don't doubt that. I don't know. I disagree with him fundamentally on much of his
surprise.
Yeah. But I really.
But that's fine. But one thing to answer your question about the election, I think Varadkar would be mad to bring on an election, and I don't think he'll do it, because the crowd who vote for us, you know, see stability.
The ABC ones.
Yeah. The crowd across all social divides and economic routes and regional parts of the country. See Varadkar as stability. And I don't think he wants an election. I don't think Fianna Fáil wants an election right now. And I'm going to make a prediction that there won't be a general election anytime soon.
Well, I hope, and I do hope, that they adopt that line, that vote for us because Leo's cool. I hope they adopt that line. Do you know what I hope even more?
Keep the recovery going anyway.
Yeah, right.
You know what I hope even more? I hope they make you in charge of elections.
No chance. No chance. I'll be cast to one side. I'll be sent to Brussels.
We won't be. There'll be no more taglines. Oh no.
Although I have to say, even though we did lose 26 seats and a whole pile of percentages, we came back with more Fine Gael ministers. I think I was the most successful director of elections ever.
You were the most successful loser.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say that's just a hiatus, and that downward spiral is going to continue.
That's the dialectic at work.
Brian, thank you very much for coming on.
Brian, it was great. It's great to chat again.
Thanks very much,
we really appreciate it. Listen, guys, we know we go on about it, but we do depend on you guys. So make sure you click. Give us a 5-star review, find us on iTunes, find us on SoundCloud. Keep an eye on echochamberpod.com. Martin is going on and on and on about his 12,000 words.
Go read the 12,000 words and change your view on Ireland being an entrepreneurial country.
Listen, folks, thanks for listening. Appreciate it.